How can jihadists suddenly be in control of Iraq's second city? The Sunni radicals of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, ISIS, storming Mosul and points north in Kirkuk province. They've also spread out and headed towards Tikrit, the hometown of Saddam Hussein, and are reportedly clashing with forces in Samar on the road to Baghdad. U.S.-trained government forces routed. Less than a 5-hour flight from Paris. Could ISIS, as its name suggests, actually carve out its own state? As of now, this Al-Qaeda offshoot holds sway in a lot of places, stretching from neighborhoods of Aleppo, near Syria's Mediterranean coast, practically all the way to the Iranian border. Is Iraq imploding? And to whom will Shiite Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki turn? To allies in Iran or to the United States, which, in what some see as a cautionary tale for Afghanistan, left no troops behind when it pulled out at the end of 2011. Finally, as an EU and Arab League leaders meeting takes place in Athens, will regional rivals discard old enmities and join forces against insurgents whose agenda has all of them in their crosshairs? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Iraq's jihadist takeover. And joining us from Suleimania in nearby Iraqi Kurdistan, Shwan ZULAL. He's an energy and political risk analyst for Carducci Consulting. Thank you for being with us. He also blogs, by the way, in KurdishViews.com. Alissa RUBIN, former Baghdad deputy bureau chief for the New York Times, joins us. Thank you for being with us. Thanks as well to former UN General Dominique Trinquant. And we hope to cross over shortly to our other guests joining us from Abu Dhabi and Tunis, the France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. As we said, the offensive is not over. Tikrit, the hometown of former strongman Saddam Hussein, also falling to militants. We mentioned Samara. Refugees fleeing Mosul could number as many, according to one estimate, as 500,000. That would be the equivalent of 1/3 of the residents of the capital of Nineveh province, Mosul, whose natives include the Speaker of Iraq's parliament.
The armed forces have given up their arms, and the commanders escaped when the battles started. They abandoned their arms, ammunition, and armored vehicles, and their positions, leaving them behind to terrorists. They even left Mosul airport and some planes.
We can say hello at this point as well, by the way, to attorney Zaid Al-ALI, the author of The Struggle for Iraq's Future. He joins us from Tunis. Thanks for joining us again in the France 24 debate. I'm going to turn first, though, to Shwan ZULAL. Shwan, our correspondent, not very far from where you are in Erbil, was reporting earlier that they had also taken over ISIS, the country's largest oil refinery, and that you're definitely feeling where you are in that part of the country, the blowback from all of this.
What's going on? I was a couple of days ago. I was near Mosul, and I saw firsthand the Iraqi soldiers fleeing. Obviously, they took their clothes off, and they're in civilian clothes. They're running, and I managed to speak to some where it's clear that the commanders abandoned them, and the average soldier just didn't have what it takes to. So there's no commanders in the, and that's one of the reasons many of the soldiers sort of just abandoned their post. And obviously, the influx of refugees is coming in largely to Kurdistan region. And now I've heard reports that coming from Saladin province, which is the southern part, which is closer to Baghdad. And there's a sense of surprise, but also the authorities in Kurdistan, they reinforcing their position within the Kurdish borders near Kirkuk. All the Iraqi army abandoned their post, and some of them are handed their weapons to the Kurdish forces. So it's not taken by the ISIS because, as we heard throughout the day, that a lot of the weapons, which is all American weapons by the Iraqi army, has been shipped already to Syria, and the borders has been open, and so there's columns of vehicles and weaponry which has been confiscated from Mosul and from areas near Mosul, Hawija, and Salah ad-Din province has all been shipped to Syria just in case the offensive starts within Iraq and they lose some ground. So these guys are very organized, and from the Kurdish point of view, Kurdistan Peshmerga have been in skirmishes with the ISIS, but there hasn't been any full-blown out conflict. There's been in the west of Iraq, in the north near the Syrian border, there were some clashes, but that now stopped.
Right, so there hasn't been a major confrontation. Before I ask you about how the Kurds are reacting to it all, again, that's extraordinary what you're saying, that you witnessed the people actually, the security forces taking off their uniforms and running away. Were you surprised by this sudden implosion?
I mean, it was out of nowhere. I mean, yes, the first impression was surprise because you wouldn't think that an army of that size and a militia of such a small size could, compared to the Iraqi army, which was present in Mosul, that they could sort of vanish within hours. And everyone sort of mingling with the civilians, because obviously they're worried that because ISIS has a very notorious reputation for beheadings and all sort of atrocities and not sparing any lives. So people were running, mingling with the civilians and trying to get away from the center of Mosul. I wasn't very close to Mosul. I was near Erbil. And you can see all the checkpoints were closed from Erbil because they didn't want a sudden influx of tens of thousands of people coming in without being security checked. And obviously, because Kurdistan is only, I think, is about 50 miles away from Mosul, Erbil, which is a completely different place in terms of security and stability. And that's obviously the security that immediately closed the borders for the city and closed down the roads so prevent anyone entering the city without being properly vetted.
All right, so we've heard. I was going to say, we've heard the reaction of Iraq's prime minister speaking a short while ago. He said that we ourselves will deal with what happened.
The army and the Iraqi police are stronger than the terrorist groups. We are victims of a plot. We are now going to take back Mosul with the strength of our army and the help of the Iraqi population.
Zaid Al-ALI, he calls it more than being a victim of a plot. He actually said the word conspiracy. He said, I know the reasons, but today I'm not here to discuss the names of those who have responsibility. Who is he referring to?
I'm not really sure who he's referring to. You would have to ask him. I have to ask him to know what it is exactly that he's referring to. But I mean, obviously, there's no question that the Prime Minister is the person who's primarily responsible for what it is that's happening in the country. He himself is very fond of referring to himself as the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. That's a position that he has by virtue of the Constitution, and he refers to himself in that position, he gives himself that title in all sorts of different contexts in relation to elections, in relation to political issues. Whenever he's criticized, he always comes back and says that he is the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, and therefore he deserves a certain amount of respect, or he has a certain amount of authority. In this context, we have a major security crisis in the country. He needs to take responsibility for the failures to secure, guard, defend Iraq's second largest province by population, one of the largest cities in the Middle East, against a relatively small number of armed insurgents from an extremist terrorist group. This is a very, very serious issue, and simply alluding to vague people who might be responsible for the developments in the city won't fool anyone. Everyone in the country knows that he is responsible because he is he's in control over the army, over the police, intelligence sector, and he has his own special forces as well. He really needs to accept responsibility for what's happening and try to convince people, insofar as this might be possible, that a different strategy is at hand to control the city.
All right. We ourselves will deal with what happened is what he said. However, it looks as though on the ground, and certainly from what Shwan ZULAL was telling us a moment ago, that's not going to work that way. reactions coming in fast and furious. Dominique Trinquant, Iran offering Iraq support against, quote, terrorism, and Turkey now calling for an emergency meeting of NATO to discuss the situation on Iraq. Is NATO going to get involved?
Probably not. I mean, what we are seeing are the consequences of what's happened in 2003. Winning war for the American army was possible and easy. Winning peace is another matter. And 10 years after, we see that we've got a large problem. And the problem is larger than that, because it's not only Iraq, it's also Syria. The whole region is in flame. And currently, we saw that the Iraqi army currently is not able to cope with the problem. So there is a major problem in the region now.
A major problem in the region. Nonetheless, if they're carving out an entire territory, if they control the country's largest refinery, if they have positions inside of Syria, by the way, it's the oil-producing region of Syria as well, are you sure NATO's not going to get involved?
I'm not sure, of course. NATO now is out from Afghanistan, so there is room for maneuver for NATO. But are the NATO countries able now to cope with such a problem? Are the US, because mainly when you're talking about NATO, you say US and some other country. Are US ready to go back to Iraq and fight in Iraq? I'm not pretty sure that President Obama will be very happy to ask that to the American citizen.
Alissa, RUBIN, you were in Baghdad at the worst of the sectarian killing, 2006, 2007, and you think back to then and now, this sudden spike that we've seen over the last 6 months in Baghdad, then in Anbar province, and now what's going on. Are you surprised?
I'm surprised they were able to take Mosul, because it is, as your correspondents and commentators have been saying, it's a significant city. It's not Fallujah. Fallujah is really relatively small, and it's strategic. It's a very important place in the north of the country. It's a crossroads, and obviously they're using it as a perch from which to move down towards Baghdad. What I don't know is how deeply they hold it, and that's very hard to tell from here. And I think we'll see in the coming days if the Iraqi army can reorganize itself. Can they really make an assault and rout them? Obviously, the insurgents...
Sure doesn't sound like it the way Shwan was speaking.
No. It doesn't. It sounds like they have done a very good job of getting rid of everyone, and once in terms of the military, frightening people enough that they ran away. And once you've ousted people, it's always harder to come back. That's the difficulty. You can get back, but it's usually at a cost. And the Iraqis have never had the kind of air support and air assets that you would need to probably do some of the bombing you'd have to do to take out groups of insurgents and make a little space to bring in your troops. And so I don't know what they're planning to do about that. But as you mentioned, there are countries that could help them.
And these images that we've been seeing on social media of ISIS fighters with Humvees and posing in front of all this U.S.-made equipment.
It's incredible to see. I've been looking at it as well. It's jaw-dropping. You sort of think, what was everybody thinking? Why didn't they ask for, why didn't they get help sooner? Why weren't steps taken? And it's really hard to know the answer sitting here.
When the end of the drawdown happened, end of 2011, did you sort of think in a corner of your mind?
Well, I think many people were very concerned when President Maliki refused to sign the SOFA. And the Americans were prepared to stay. I think the military was prepared to stay at relatively high levels of soldiers, whether that was 10,000 or 20,000. President Obama wanted many fewer, but it would have been something that they could have built on if something like this happened. When you don't have any there, I think now to get the U.S. to come in, well, as the general said, it will be difficult.
What can they do with all this equipment, by the way?
They can control the area, probably. They can be in a certain position with all this strong equipment, in a position to forbid the Iraqi army to come back. And just to remind us also that there is a problem between Sunni and Shiite too. And in this area, probably this group is well established because it is in the Sunni area. And this area is linked to Syria. And I'm going back to all the region. So we are back to a combat between an area, a Sunni area, against a Shiite area. And so it will be very difficult to control all that. And as you said, will NATO, US come back, put air power at the disposal of the Iraqi army? I'm not sure. I mean, we are looking now in the world destabilization everywhere. In Sahel, in this region, in Ukraine, it was like that a few weeks ago. So people must think that the defense effort is still there. We need still to have army able to control that. And there's an effort to do to control all this area. And this effort should be done, as you said, perhaps at the time in 2010, in 2012. After it's too late and you've got to win another war.
All right, and we can talk about what conclusions you draw for Afghanistan when we come back, and also get the reaction of the rest of our panel to all of this. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.